Blaire White. Blaire White. The truth about Trump and the trans community. This should be good, coming from the trans community's biggest pick me. Well, not the trans community, the right's biggest trans pick me. And talking about Donald Trump, who has been, at best, lukewarm about trans people. And at worst, been part of the charge to make it illegal for someone who identifies as a woman to use the woman's restroom if they were arbitrarily assigned a different gender at birth. So, Blaire, let's talk about truth in the trans community. Let's talk about Trump and the trans community. Take it away.
Do you want to be in the video? You want to be in the video? No? Okay, you...
God, look at how ashamed that dog is to be in the same frame as Blaire White. I don't blame you, pup. I'm sorry. You're too cute to be hers.
I'm really uncomfortable. Okay, let's see if Angela wants to be in it. Oh, now she's mad. Bella, stop! Jeez, leave him alone. Hey guys, welcome back to...
Okay, if she wasn't such a piece of shit, that was actually kind of cute and adorable.
My channel. Hope everyone's staying safe out there. So today's video is on a topic that you guys ask me to discuss all the time, and I've definitely dragged my feet a little bit in doing it, not because I've been pessimistic about politics. I feel like I've more so been nihilistic about politics, which is crazy because I feel like I used to always say nihilism was like intellectual laziness and just feeling like everything sucks is just an excuse to not talk about fixing things, but I relate to it now. Lately, especially, I felt like everything political just sucks and I can't add to it, but this is something I can add to. So let's talk about Trump and...
Everything political does suck, but we have to deal with it anyway. Like, it's probably the truest thing she's going to say in this video.
The trans community. Disclaimer, this is a video that you're probably not going to grasp my full opinion unless you watch the entire thing. This is one of those videos that I also want to do kind of chronological, like I want to start at the beginning of the Trump presidency until now and discuss everything. So before we do this very deep dive, I am so excited to announce that this video is sponsored by Surfshark. To surf the internet actually adds, which is a great thing. You can use my code Blaire for 85% off. Okay, so Trump and the trans community. I really want to get into how Trump, I would imagine, and I speculate how he actually feels about transgender people. I'll get into that. But first, we're going to get into what has been really frustrating for me.
One thing I will say about Trump is that I think one thing we can say is that his opinion on any person is the same regardless of their demographics. What can you do for me? How can you make me money? And is there any way I can get more power from you? That's it. That's all he cares about. So his opinion of trans people in general is that he doesn't care. He doesn't care about trans women being women or trans men being men. He doesn't care about any of that. Individual trans people, how can they make me money? How can they get me more powerful? And is there anything else they can do for me? That's it. That's all he cares about. Now, the fact that he has managed to surround himself largely with people who are white supremacist, are transphobic, are homophobic, means that he's going to lean more towards this transphobic, in this specific case, transphobic, homophobic rhetoric. I do think he is legitimately racist. I want to make that clear. I do think that he is very, very racist, and has been for decades. There's the fact that the Nixon administration prosecuted him for discriminating against black people in his apartments. So when you've got Nixon calling someone a racist, they're probably pretty fucking racist. But when it comes to trans people, I don't think he cares. He cares about individuals who can get him more money or more power, and that is it.
The entire presidency, which has been, I feel like transgenderism by both sides has been used as a political football whenever it's convenient. And I stand by what I have always said, which is that transgenderism is not to be politicized. It is to be medicalized. It is to be treated as a medical issue, not a political talking point. So you can imagine the past 4 years.
Of course you have. Because by making it medical, then you make people who agree with you right, and anyone who goes with the actual sociological definition wrong. Everything is political, Blaire.
Years have been a little bit frustrating for me. What I've noticed since 2016 is that every 6 months or so, there's some new, very scary.
Yeah, I agree, Magmo.
Very sounding, very shocking trans headline. And it is always something to the effect of all of our rights are being stripped.
The Trump administration attacked. Yep. Yep, these are all real things that happened.
Our lives are in danger. And the trans community, like I said, every 6 months because of these stories, just goes into complete hysteria and panic mode. And it actually started with the election itself. On the day of the election, there was a story ran that after he won, it was either 8 or 10 transgender children committed suicide. Huge trans influencers like Gigi Gorgeous and really every single other one made videos about it, ran with it like it was true.
8 transgender kids had committed suicide. I was like, my stomach, I just got goosebumps, like my stomach turned.
I don't remember hearing about this. I don't have an issue believing it happened. I think that as tragic as it was, the people who committed suicide were stupid for doing so. And I think that there were a lot of people back in 2016 and early 2017 who were claiming that Trump was going to be harder on trans people than he has been. He's done some horrible things, but there was definitely this idea that he was going to push for worse against trans people. But as Magma says, he seems apathetic at least. And yeah, he doesn't care about trans people, but he'll put his weight behind someone who kisses his ass, and that person may have an issue with trans people, i.e. Pence.
And it was actually scary even for me. The trans community was rightfully horrified because obviously if that were true, that's an insane, horrible tragedy. The problem is that it was 1,000% false. It was so false that GLAAD had to come out a few days later and say that we shouldn't be spreading that because it's completely unverified.
Okay, cool. Like, again, no one is saying they were right to commit suicide or that this is okay. It's understandable. It would have been tragic and wrong, but it's understandable why they would feel that way. At least I think it is. And what has Trump done? Let's see. There was the trans people banned in the military. There's his continued support, or at least lack of non-support for trans bathroom bills. There was, let's see, what she herself talked about. Ban on transgender troops, erase transgender civil rights protection in healthcare. He's attacked trans youth. And his administration has been working to define trans people out of existence. So, yeah, that's what he's done.
And say that we shouldn't be spreading that because it's completely unverified and completely untrue. In fact, it was one verified Twitter user that said it and said they had a private source confirming it, and suddenly it was being reported as fact. So to me, that was the beginning of the politicization.
Why is the trans ban from the military understandable? The bathrooms thing is basically just a dog whistle to certain people. What do you mean healthcare making it so they're like everyone else since they can reject others? The point is people should not be rejected because they are trans. They can be rejected for other legitimate reasons just like anyone else. But you can't you shouldn't be able to reject someone for medical care just because they are trans. And Trump has made it so that, yes, they now can do that. There have been documented cases of EMTs responding to an accident or responding to an event, and they go to help someone and find out they're trans, and they just walk away. That should not be the case.
Of trans issues in the last 4 years was that right there in the beginning. So let's jump forward to 2017, the Trump military ban, trans military ban. So this was the beginning of actual policy decisions being made by the administration about trans people. I understand the argument in which it is not ideal for trans people to serve in certain capacities, the front lines, very specific example. I think the reliance on trans-specific medication, hormones obviously, and the fact that often they are placed in countries where they're very vulnerable because they are trans, like think of.
So get our troops out of those countries. But also, there are plenty of people on the front line who have to take medication just as regularly as trans people. Unless I'm wrong, I could be wrong that people like diabetics or people who have to take other regular medications aren't allowed to be on the front lines. That's a different issue from blanket banning trans people. And there are plenty of trans people who don't take hormones. I know, shocking. You don't consider them trans people. But there are plenty of trans people who don't take hormones, who don't need that kind of thing. The problem is that there was nothing in his ban which specifically targeted people who needed hormones or people who had who were just starting transition. No, it's just anyone who identifies as a gender other than what they were assigned at birth is not allowed in the military. Is that true, Sibri TV? You just get discharged if you need any kind of regular medication? Let's just check. Disqualifications many do, and any type of diabetes generally does. There is not automatic grounds for separation from the military. Okay. Medical conditions which will discharge you from U.S. military. Okay, here we go. A disability discharge in the IDES, Integrated Disability Evaluation System, through which people with potentially disabling conditions are evaluated. Okay. Medical risk to the member or the welfare of other members. Okay. This doesn't list. I mean, I'm sure that it's let's see. This is probably not something I'm going to be able to find like a definitive list. Because it's something that's more or less is mainly the administrative discharge for entry-level performance and conduct. This is based on command determinations for the military service. System to warrant medical discharge. Okay. What qualifies for medical discharge? USA. Yeah. When sick or injured to the point where military duty denote there's a medical evaluation of the medical condition. Unclear may or may not be appealed. Okay. So yeah. It doesn't look like there's a blanket. If you require regular medication, you're banned from being in the military. I mean, it did say diabetes is one that will generally ban you, but again, trans people don't always need regular medication. And there are ways of getting medication that don't require the supply line of the military, although they generally require the ability to receive mail. So, yeah, that blows that one out.
About, I don't know, like me fighting in Iran. Like what? Like obviously in countries where it's illegal or dangerous, that can compromise the effectiveness of certain operations by having.
Assuming that the people they interact with know that they're trans. If you put on a uniform, went through boot camp, and went to Iran, no one would accuse you of being a man. Because you aren't. Same thing if someone who, you know, regularly, someone else who went through the same hormone therapy you went through and and transitioned from woman to man, you know, put Buck Angel in a fucking military uniform and send him to Iran and dare one of them to call him a woman. Like, again, this is where we get into passing privilege. If you're not passing, that's when it's a problem, but they can't really discriminate in that way because it's so subjective. But even so, that doesn't preclude someone from being in the military just because they don't pass enough to go to Iran or whatever. There are plenty of other duty stations they can receive, even if they are just limited to the US, where they can still be helpful and still be useful to the military. And again, there's nothing saying that a perfectly passing trans person couldn't go to Iran. People in Iran shouldn't be seeing their genitals anyway.
A trans person in the mix. I did feel, however, that banning them under any and every capacity, we're talking cooks, we're talking medics and doctors and, coders. Like, there are a lot of positions in the military that are not directly on the front lines fighting. In fact, the overwhelming majority of them are not. And I just can't think of a reason why a trans person couldn't be like a cook or if they're a talented nurse, Having said all that, there is something to be said for the fact that the military denies people joining for a lot of reasons, and a lot of those reasons may even seem silly. Like, if you have even the slightest bit of anxiety, you cannot be in the military. If you have not great eyesight, you cannot be in the military. If you have gauges in your ears, tattoos in certain places, if you are overweight, depression, OCD, none of those things you can join the military with. They will deny you. And so
none of those are related to being, none of those are necessarily on the same level as being trans. You can fix being overweight. With therapy, you can fix anxiety and mental disorders like that. And with therapy and medication, maybe just therapy, you can you can be perfectly stable and normal as a trans person. And I'm only pointing out that therapy may be necessary because of how shitty trans people have it in our society. If we didn't have such a rigidly hierarchical gender structure and such rigid gender roles, then someone could transition and be no big deal. No one would care because no one should, because it doesn't affect them.
To me, thinking, I understand how crippling gender dysphoria is. So I actually do understand the argument that would be something that would hurt the effectiveness of people in the military. So, I feel like if someone were to pay me to debate both sides, like, Blaire, here's, I don't know, $500, like, debate why trans people should be allowed in the military indefinitely, I could do that. If someone was like, Blaire, here's $500 to debate why they should never be in, I could probably do that too. It's very much a gray area of a topic. But honestly, I felt like it was way.
I think that it should be evaluated on an individual basis, and if their circumstances preclude them based on the established medical lines, then they should be excluded for those reasons. But the issue is that none of that was part of Trump's proposal. Trump's military ban was just anyone who identifies other than the gender they were assigned at birth is out. And no one can join. So that's the problem. You're running apologia for Trump here when your apologia has nothing to do with what he said.
Way too sweeping, like I said. So let's jump to early.
Okay. There's nothing about being trans that indicates you would be more or less stable. And again, the majority of mental instability in trans people is because of the way society treats them and expects them to act, rather than anything directly related to being trans in other respects.
2018, the next big trans headline was that Trump was forcing the CDC to ban the word transgender from any and all documents. There are other words allegedly being banned, but this is obviously about the trans stuff. This was completely fake, like 110% fake. This did not happen. CNN has come out and said this did not happen, but yet it was a viral story that every trans influencer and every person that the trans community looks to as one of our defenders ran with. And the problem with running with fake stories is that the fake story will get a lot of attention up front, but the correction will get maybe 1/10 of the attention. So I think there are probably a lot of people, maybe even some of you guys, let me know in the.
So even though, there I go, pulling a Harmon Smith, fucking with my mic. So even if the Trump administration did not explicitly request the CDC to ban certain words from their statements or their studies or whatever, even if that's true and they didn't ban those words, as the headline she pulled up here, but you don't need to parse the language of the Trump administration to understand its goals, demonstrates what we all understand about Trump. Or at least about the Trump administration, in that they don't like trans people. Just like they don't like black people, just like they don't like Mexicans or other Latino people, just like they don't like gay people. So even if they're not explicitly banned, it's pretty clear that Trump doesn't want to advance their rights. Sibri, do I really need to prove the Trump administration doesn't like black people, given their actions over the last 6 months? We'll just go with the last 6 months.
The comments who still think that the word transgender is banned from the CDC documents. No, it just never happened. Ask CNN, ask anyone. Like, it didn't happen. Next up, jump to fall 2018. And this time, the big trans everyone be scared headline was that trans people would no longer exist under law. This one came right before midterms because I think if you really pay attention, you'll notice that the most salacious, fear-mongering stories, especially as it relates to certain minority groups, will always come around elections. We have Steph Signotti doing a video that got hundreds of thousands of views saying trans people will no longer exist. And the gist of it was that trans people would no longer be able to change their gender legally as it pertains to certain documents like birth certificates, driver's license, social security. All those are things that I changed before 2018, but I know an immense amount of people in all states who have changed it since then.
What has Trump done to help homosexuals? Since you want to state some obvious facts, what has Trump done to help homosexuals? Please explain.
This literally just never happened. It just wasn't a thing. I can get into the nitty gritty, but all you need to know is it didn't happen. But the entirety of the trans community was believing that it did. And all of our influencers were saying that it was true.
So it didn't happen, but he tried to. They've been trying to make it difficult or impossible for trans people to transition legally, just like they've been trying to make it difficult for them to transition physically and socially and emotionally. And the fact that they're trying to, and that this is where their rhetoric is going, shows their dislike and disdain for trans people, for the trans community. I see where this is going. She's trying to say that the media has been stirring up lies about Trump and his disdain for the trans community based on inaccuracies or factual mistakes or misleading wording or what have you. But again, we just have to look at the rhetoric. We just have to look at what they've supported and what they have not supported.
Very sad. And the problem is that every single time that one of these stories comes out saying that it's the end of trans people, right? Like, I'll know it comes out because my DM is just flooded with young trans people scared and asking me for help and guidance and saying, like, can you please help?
Those poor kids going to Blaire White for help and guidance.
Like, it really does set the community into an emotional uproar. It does. So let's jump to something recent. Last month, Pride Month, you might have seen that it came out and the new headline was that Trump was removing all healthcare for all trans people. That was the big thing.
That's not what that says. It says Trump is erasing transgender civil rights in healthcare, which basically is the idea, as I said earlier, that the administration wants to make it okay for trans people to be refused service on the grounds of their being trans and not for other legitimate reasons. This is an issue. This is a real problem because there have been, as I said before, documented cases of trans people being involved in incidences, EMTs responding, realizing the person they're working on is trans, and then walking away and not continuing to help them while they died in the street. This has happened, and we need to make sure that when that does happen, there is proper repercussions for it. Otherwise, it will keep happening.
Right? So this hit during Pride Month, and not just any Pride Month. It hit during, obviously, June, and even now, July, about to be August. It's a very emotionally heightened time as it pertains to social issues, everything happening in the world, obviously. Like, this type of headline is going to really set people off. The problem is that, again, this didn't happen. I debunked it in an article in the Post Millennial. You can go read that and get every single...
Oh, the Post Millennial. It was ruled against in court before Trump was even president. But it is impossible for the Trump administration to revoke it. Transgender protection about being revoked was... Okay, hang on. The hell was it? Okay. Trump administration, this is from April of 2020, has announced it is planning to roll back an important regulation about the healthcare rights law that protects transgender discrimination healthcare insurance coverage. Concerned about... Okay. Healthcare rights law is section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act. Prohibits discrimination in health coverage and care, bans discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, and disability in health programs and activities that receive federal funding. Okay. Includes most health facilities. Okay. Plan to adopt regulations to explain what different laws mean. 2016, adopted a rule explaining what the healthcare rights law means and how it plans to enforce it. Regulations like this one don't create new protections that weren't already there or change the law. They do provide important clarifications about what the law requires. This 2016 regulation clarified is when the HCR law prohibits sex discrimination in healthcare. This includes anti-transgender discrimination. Also clarified important parts of the law related to discrimination based on race. Okay. This regulation made it easier for transgender people to enforce their rights under the healthcare rights law and get access to the healthcare they need. That even if HHS hadn't adopted the regulation, anti-transgender discrimination in healthcare would have still been illegal under the HCR law. Numerous courts over nearly 2 decades have said the federal sex discrimination laws prohibit discrimination against transgender people. Okay. After the regulation was adopted, several state officials and organizations sued HHS, saying that the regulation needed to be overturned. They handpicked a judge in Texas who is known for ruling against Obama and has temporarily blocked HHS from enforcing parts of the regulation. Ignored the vast majority of other courts and ordered HHS to temporarily stop enforcing parts of the regulation, including the parts protecting transgender people. In that specifically highly unusual move, refused to appeal the judge's ruling and told the judge it would work to roll back the 2016 regulation. The judge put the case on hold, worked on the regulation. The Texas District Court again ordered HHS not to enforce a portion of the rule that relate to anti-transgender discrimination. This ruling doesn't change the requirements of the ACA or the federal or state laws. At the same time, we've seen several other cases move on this issue. All of the federal courts to analyze the issue have agreed that the healthcare rights law protects transgender people from discrimination. In October, the Supreme Court heard arguments In a case about whether federal employment discrimination laws prohibit discrimination based on being transgender, it influence how courts and government articles. Okay. Trump administration published a formal proposal to roll back numerous provisions of the 2016 regulation, drastically cutting back. So she's just lying here. Yeah. Says or does is the law of the land, and most courts have said it protects transgender people. Only Congress has the power to change the law by repealing the ACA. Many state laws prohibit discrimination in healthcare and discrimination. However, the Trump administration's actions will likely cause confusion for many patients, providers, and insurance companies, and it could lead to more anti-transgender discrimination. So she's right in that this was something that happened in 2016, but they're still under protection, but he's trying to muddy the waters and make it easier to create more anti-transgender discrimination. So I'll give her about a 50%. That's a failing grade.
Detail. But the long and short of it is that these protections that were supposedly being repealed that protected trans people were never actually set in place. They were actually...
So they were, in fact. But a few states got a specific judge who had ruled consistently against Obama to rule against them so that they had some sort of precedent for it, but it's not fully settled. But Trump is trying to create more precedent to try to discriminate against trans people. So, well, it's not Trump himself, it's his administration. So you're just wrong here, Blaire. You're lying to your audience.
Proposed and then struck down before Trump ever took office. Like, this isn't even a defense of Trump. This isn't even a defense of anything. This is just literally...
And again, it wasn't struck down. One judge made a ruling which is counter to literally every other court ruling on it.
The media emotionally manipulating trans people and people who care about trans
Called it. You don't miss. You don't miss.
People into thinking something is happening when it's really not. These protections were struck down in court before he was president. How could he repeal something that never was put in place? It doesn't make sense. But it was too perfect of a storm to come out.
He's not, you're right, he's not trying to repeal it. He's trying to put more and different regulations in place, which specifically counteract the healthcare rights law, which grants transgender people this protection. So yeah, you're right in that he's not trying to repeal it, but he's trying to basically legislate it out of existence.
Out during Pride Month, one of the craziest Pride months ever, obviously, 2020. And people were just not, and they might still not, be prepared to hear or ready to accept that that wasn't the whole truth. Or really, that wasn't the truth at all. Healthcare, as it pertains to trans people, is exactly the same as it was last year, the year before that, the year before that. But once again, the emotions of the trans community and the people who care about us and the clicks that we provide is just way too great for the media to pass up. Doesn't really matter if it's not true. They're still going to run with it. And it sucks. So let's get into how...
At least that New York Times article you showed was more true than what you've said so far, Blaire. So I wouldn't be throwing stones about the media lying.
Trump feels about trans people. Now, anyone can only speculate. Like, no one knows how someone really feels, right? My gut and everything I've seen over the past 4 years, which, keep in mind, I am very plugged into trans issues. Obviously, it's my career, it's my life. Like, I've watched every news story coming out about trans people since he took office. My gut is that he probably doesn't really know what transgenderism is, at least not to the extent for which it exists in 2020, like what people think of it now. What likely is the case is that transgenderism is such a culture war, hot button issue that I feel that the instance of like the trans military ban, I feel like he could have won his whole presidency without doing that and none of his base would have complained. But it was red meat to the segment of his base that maybe does feel a certain way about trans people. And so I feel that he did that partly, at least, because it gave his base something that they could say, oh, good job on. I don't think he had to do that. I feel like it was unnecessary, 110%. Like, call me pessimistic, but I really don't feel that those in the media and in politics have like a
So yeah, this is, like I said, the media is blowing it out of proportion. Trump actually isn't as anti-trans. He just did that to appeal to his base. It wasn't necessary, but he did it anyway.
true, like, genuine care, and that includes Trump, like a genuine care about the trans issue. I think for most people, whether it be Trump, whether it be the media, whether it be all the talking heads and figureheads that are coming up in your mind right now, I think it's just one of those things that is simply another issue to battle on and virtue signal about for both sides. I think that Trump has a base that wants to be fed certain lines about the transgender topic, and he will occasionally feed them that. And I think that that's really the extent of how he feels. I find that some people on the right.
Also, again, she's deliberately conflating Trump's position on it with his administration's actions on it. And as I said, I don't think Trump gives a shit about trans people in general. He just cares about what individuals can do for him. But his administration has clearly signaled that they don't like trans people. They don't agree that trans is a thing. They're just people putting on a costume and playing pretend. And her running apologia for it is fucking disgusting.
Right, have a misconception that transgenderism is an invention of the political left or a consequence of gender studies rather than a phenomenon that has been around for a very long time, if not forever, and likely isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And it is real people. I think, like, in the minds of people who have never met a trans person, like, all they know is what they hear from the media and on social media. It's just like something invented by the left. It's just like a political thing. So I do feel that's probably how.
Is it just is her lip gloss on her upper lip like that? That looks. It's been bugging me the whole video. Also, yeah, people like you help regular people to think that, oh, all this trans ideology is just something invented by the left, when it's something that was invented by respected sociologists with data to back them up.
How Trump feels. I do. I mean, there really exists no interviews where Trump explicitly discusses transgender people. So I don't really know how he feels. And I feel like everyone kind of wants me to know how he feels and talk about it. And I don't know. The military ban thing was shitty in a lot of ways. I understand it in other ways.
This is something that both liberals and conservatives do. They try to say, well, I don't know what a person says. He hasn't said specifically what he thinks. When we can infer, this is an issue. You can never know empirically what someone truly believes. Even if they make a statement about something, that could be a lie. There's no way to empirically, categorically know what someone believes. However, we can look at the rhetoric someone uses, at the policies they support, or again, the ones they don't not support, to tell where their beliefs lie. So while I agree, I don't think Trump gives a shit about trans people, either positively or negatively. He's completely apathetic about trans people. His administration, the people in his cabinet, and the people he's appointed to various courts and other positions within the government clearly do have an anti-trans agenda.
But other than that, a lot of these headlines that come out turn out to not even be real. So I don't
Hey, OT Marty, it's going all right. How about you?
really know how to feel half the time. The other thing that I think is important to mention is that, I care about trans issues. And if you're watching this as a supporter of mine, you probably care at least a little bit, unless you're, subscribed to me for another reason. But
I'm not watching this as a supporter of you, but I also support trans rights. That's a weird overlap.
I think sometimes when you care and you're invested deeply into an issue, your judgment is clouded as to the extent for which the entire world cares. And I also feel like trans issues in the grand scheme of the world are not like the most important thing. Like, they're important to me, don't get me wrong. And I think they should be more important to more people, but I don't know. I will say, if anyone's watching who can hook it up, I would love to interview the president, talk to the president on camera, possibly pick his brain a little bit. Maybe
If anyone could, I'll bet Blaire White could. I mean, he invited Tim Pool and other people like that to the White House, so I'm sure that she could sit down with the president. I don't think it would be as productive as she thinks it would be, but that would be a fucking good meme. Content right there.
provide some healing for the trans community and bridge a divide. I do feel like that's my purpose in general with everything that I do, so maybe that'll happen. Let's all will that to happen. It's gonna happen. So with that being said, that is my long...
Okay, yeah. So, as I suspected, this is just her running apologia for the Trump administration and claiming that since Trump hasn't specifically come out and said that Trump people don't exist and I want them all gone, that the Trump administration actually is agnostic on trans people and is just, he fed a little red meat to his base early on and he's just been not doing anything, which is completely counterfactual and the opposite of reality, as expected from Blaire White's plastic world. Hey, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show. Remember to like, share, and leave a comment because it helps me. Subscribe and ring that bell to help you. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.